Hey, good morning, everybody. How are we doing?
Doing
Oh,
great.
fantastic.
Oh, that's great. So good to see you. So good to see everyone here in the chat too. Holy cow, do we have a good crew out there today? Good seeing everybody. How are we doing today? Oh, best day ever. Oh, well, hey, Dominic, it's thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Funny story. I didn't get a chance to tell you this, but when I first got the message, I was like, "This is a joke, right?" Like, so I'm so excited to be here. Actually, and be invited to share with you all. So I'm Dominick Raimato. I'm based out of North Jersey. I work for a company called SHI, but I run a blog known as Data with Dom. So you might have seen me out on the road, been out at some different speaking engagements and things like that. This Saturday, going to be joining Kevin in Pittsburgh. He beat me there, but headed out there this afternoon so that way meet up with some of the community. But huge passion for data, especially around citizen development specifically, and really excited to share a little bit about what we might be able to do with some data flows and really help with that, not only just some data engineering, but even some citizen development as well.
Oh, that's
Oh,
great.
that's
Yeah, I'm
awesome.
looking forward to seeing you in real life later today. It'll be kind of unique, right? On a live
Right?
stream
Yeah.
in the morning and together the rest of the weekend. So,
Yeah.
Exactly. So.
Oh, this is cool. So if you are in the Pittsburgh area, and you have some free time this weekend, is it too late to register? Are they just out? Can they swing by? What's the deal? Do you know?
boy, I don't know. I haven't looked at the registration site, but there's always room
Okay.
for one more.
Right,
Right.
Sneak
right.
in. Act
Right.
like you
Swing
know
on
what you're
down. Yeah.
doing.
Oh, it's good
Hey,
seeing
well,
everyone today. It's good to see everybody. And yes, we've got Leslie Welsh in the chat. Good morning, Aaron, Christina, and Jack is here too. Oh, good to see everybody. Good, good, good. Aman is here. I don't know what that means. Oh, NJ in the house. Yep, yep,
New Jersey, yeah. Hey, I
yeah.
do want to give one other shout out. There was
Hmm.
also a sequel Saturday Orlando that was supposed to happen this
Oh,
weekend.
Yeah.
I heard they postponed it. There was a couple friends of ours that were going down to speak and everything. So I hope everybody is well there, and um, all the victims could kind of get out of it soon. Don't know what's going to happen with that conference, but it sounded like they made the right move, to go ahead and at least postpone or whatever for it. So.
awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. Well, it's good seeing everyone, but we've heard people really don't care so much about us and want us to just get into the work. So we're just gonna get into the work. Let's dive into it. So we have a few rules to make things easy. Rule number one: please prefix any question with a Q. That'll help Kevin and me make sure that we get those questions into the queue. Rule number two: please don't spam or repeat any questions. It just makes things hard for us to use. We haven't had any of that stuff. And if you really do want your question asked, please come join the conversation over on YouTube. We are on LinkedIn. We are on X. We are on Rumble too. So we'll see all you guys over there. But I'm just letting you know the stream interface for those other chats ain't great. So if you come over to YouTube, it works best there. Okay. And then as we're going to be diving into Dataflows Gen2, want to know from the audience, are you using Dataflows Gen2 today? Have you tried it? Are you using it? What's your experience level with it? I know I have to say, I'm a huge fan of Dataflows Gen 1 and the abilities that it gives to the citizen data engineers out there. So I'm excited to do more with Dataflows Gen 2 and get into this presentation. So
All right.
awesome.
So yeah. So why don't we actually start with the biggest challenge, which and I think this was even starting to kind of come up a little bit is when should I start to use the data flow, right? When do I feel a little bit more
Mhm.
comfortable with the data flow? And I think that really is an important piece to talk about because now with Fabric and having Data Factory in there and being able to use pipelines or data flows. So when do I really want to use which tool, right? So what I find data flows to really be a powerful tool for is how do I go after data that's structured in APIs, or there's already a connector created, things of that nature. So things that have been created for me that are a little easier to use through the Power Query interface, be able to select your connector and go after that. I'm not really looking to use Dataflows primarily for SQL databases, things of that nature, stuff that I can use pipelines for, just simply because it's a lot easier. But when I have things that are a little bit more complex, or I need to do a little bit of transformation in the process, I mean, yes, I know we want to do as much transformation upstream, but let's be honest, if we're using an API, I can't transform anything upstream. I have to do it here. So this is where I think Dataflows do a really great job. So if we're good with it, let's kind of jump in here and we'll take a look. So I'm going to walk you through just something that we've gone through here recently. And I think that this is a challenge that a lot of people have been struggling with over the years. And the best way to just to show it is using something that you probably all can do today. And that is with using the Microsoft Graph API endpoints. So the Microsoft Graph API endpoints are available to you today. They're fairly easy to use. But one of my favorite things to use specifically out of there are the reporting endpoints. So they're available to you today. And what they do is they show you your user activity in the different Microsoft 365 applications. So for example, we'll take a look at the Teams endpoint first. We can see how many private chats did you send? How many chats did you post in a channel? How many meetings did you attend? Did you share your screen? How long did you share your screen? So it gives us a lot of information about utilization. But there are some challenges to that. And to understand those really quick, I'm going to jump actually over to some documentation really fast, because I think it's important to understand the why and why I think it's important for us to use a data flow. So this is a great write-up from Microsoft.
Hey, Dominic.
Oh, yeah.
Just real quick. When you say you have access to the Graph APIs today, does that mean like you get your own personal information, right? So anybody that calls them could get their own personal information, and then elevated permissions could get like tenant permission? Because I always thought that you had to be set up at a more of a tenant level at first. So I didn't realize you could even play with them for personal. Is that true?
Yeah, so you can play with some of the endpoints for personal. So you can connect and pull things like, for example, you can pull your My Chats, My Tasks, things like that. But I am talking about, sorry, I should probably have said that, is we're talking a little bit about elevated permissions to see everyone's user activity. You cannot just see your own. You would have to have some elevated permissions. But we're going to do that with a service principal. So what's nice about this is we'll be able to actually lock down the experience and say, hey, I'm only going to allow people to read. And pull this data so they can consume it. So it'll just make life a little easier for everyone when they're pulling that data in.
Makes sense.
Good call out.
And hey, is this available for GCC government high, security?
Well, there we go. So it'll actually tell you right here. So for it does not seem to be for some of the GCC content. We would not be able to use these endpoints specifically, but there are endpoints that are available. So if this isn't the endpoint for you, there might still be other endpoints for you to use. But this was a great place to just kind of start, at least from a data collection perspective, because one of the biggest problems we've always had, especially when it comes to Microsoft 365, is people adopting the platform and understanding, like, people, they have the tool, or are they really using the tool? So when we actually go in here, we start to pull this data. If you scroll down a little bit here, you can see just some of the data that we can capture. There's a lot of information available to us. But what's really neat is when we look at our documentations, we have some options here that we could go and grab our data from. So we can actually set a period value. We can say, hey, I want to pull what the totals look like for the last 7, 30, 90, or even 180 days for a user. Or I can actually call for a specific date and bring that data back as well. So I could get really granular and look at people's daily usage of the tools. But there is a small problem with that approach, is that daily value only is there for 30 days. And if I want to trend over time, I need to start warehousing that data. And in the past, maybe as somebody that was a Microsoft 365 expert, didn't necessarily have the data engineering skills to go move this data in, or it was a little bit more difficult. Maybe couldn't even get your project prioritized within your organization. So this is where I think Fabric really unlocks that opportunity and really allows us to explode with that data and start to bring it in and start to make some meaningful decisions with it.
That's
so
awesome.
So let's switch back to my Fabric environment. And what we'll do here is we'll actually.
Oh, hang on 1 second. Dominic, this is a great moment. We're actually going to switch over. Oopsies here. I don't know why it always does that. We're going to switch over to, and this is something that's open to any of the people. Actually, if you watch, we don't restrict this to just members. But if you're watching this, and if you have a question that for someone that we're going to have on, or for us that you want us to queue up for a given topic, send that question over to datagod at kranosbi.com. We'll get that queued up for you. This is a question that came in from a viewer. From Adin Sarbin. Is a pipeline copy activity faster at loading data to a bronze lakehouse table overwrite than a Dataflow Gen2 with fast copy turn on? Which would you use? And so I think this is good when we're talking about the difference between data flows and pipelines. This is a great question to slot in there.
Yeah, I think it's a great time to hit this. So what I would say, and we were, this came in early, so we got a little chance to kind of talk about this. So I don't know if one is necessarily faster than the other. I believe pipelines would be considered to be faster, but I would use a pipeline all day because that would be a much easier process to be able to pull in. We're just doing a straight overwrite. Once again, if I'm a citizen developer and I'm new to Fabric, Dataflows is probably going to be easier for me. Kevin, I think you actually shared a little bit about some of the stuff you've seen also on the back end from a compute perspective, and why you would use pipeline over a data flow for this scenario.
Yeah, we're talking about that, and there was a lot of things in the chat that came up as well. Is with depending on the activity, you could see Dataflow Gen2 today seem to take up more CU consumption, right? And so managing your capacities, I heard somebody say the other day, we're not a capacity manager, we're a CU manager, right? Or a CU architect. We're trying to architect in a way to minimize the consumption of the CUs. So you want to experiment with it. And when you brought up a good point earlier, right, is use the right tool for the right job, right? So where you're continuing down is with these the graph APIs. Maybe the Dataflow Gen2 is good to use that, but measure the CUs, measure everything about it. So they definitely have their place, and I think everybody's looking to say, should I use it here? Should I use it there? And you just really got to kind of test. But there's some broad principles you're saying, right? To SQL, use the right tool. You use pipelines, right, for SQL type thing.
Right. And it's always about how you optimize everything too, I think, to some degree as well, right? If you're going to go through this process, and it's funny actually. So, and for everyone, I'm sure we can figure out a way to share the link out. I've written a series on this, actually, this particular topic. So if you like this, you found it interesting, you could go back and do it on your own after the stream. But the specifics here is like how we optimize. When I actually went and built out everything, the CU usage was very low for this process, even with all of the API calls we're making and the transformations we're looking at. I mean, some people look at this and be like, oh my gosh, this is so much. But it's been able to stay under control because it's not unwieldy. The way we've been able to bring everything in and optimize it has made it really easy to use and streamlined from a CU perspective. So, and plus, it's an API call. And particularly with this endpoint, that data is only available once a day. So, I'm not going to be calling on it constantly. I'm not going to be constantly refreshing. So it should hopefully be able to be managed and avoid a heavy cost to that CU.
And the link to your blog is in the chat, so people can go check that out as well. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. All right. So let's dig back in here a little bit and just kind of go through some of the steps that we went through to kind of get things going. I would love to be able to walk through all the pieces, but I want to make sure we also have some time to have some conversation and chat and answer some questions in the process. So I've staged a lot of stuff and had it ready to go. So the number one thing that we did here is to get started is we created our lakehouse, obviously, to get it ready to go. And then what I did was I actually used a notebook to create my tables for all of my graph endpoints. So you can see here, I just kind of created, using a little PySpark, I created my columns and tables and the columns associated with these columns. Now, I'll kind of get into why I did it this way for this data versus just simply using it in Dataflows, because if you're already ahead of me a little bit, you know that you could create these tables inside of a data flow. I'll explain why here in a moment. But the idea here is to simply to make this as simple as possible. So I've gone ahead and created these different tables and put them in place, and they're ready to go. So you can see here, I created one for all 5 major applications of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. That's Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, email, and Viva Engage. Yes, Viva Engage. I love my Yammer. I was always a big fan of it, so still a big fan and love to track metrics there. So I've got these tables already created. I was able to just run this, and they were already placed. And if I jump in here, you can see there I've got my tables already in place. So with all that in mind, I now jumped into my data flow. And when I created my data flow, I had to do a little bit of work to get everything set up. So a couple things that we'll highlight here. So the first thing I did was, because I like using application authentication with my graph APIs, I created a service principal. I created a client secret with that, and I added the permissions on there. So I have essentially my tenant ID, app ID, and client secret for my application in place. I then also created a function that will perform the authentication for me. So if I actually jump into, oh, geez. Where's my advanced editor? Hold on. I've zoomed in too much. Hold on.
Yeah, when we zoom in, it gets a little harder to navigate. Yeah, it'll be nice if Dataflows could integrate with key vaults at some point, right? So you don't have to keep those as parameters in there.
Yeah.
But your approach here is at least good to try to hide it, to only look at it when you need it, type of thing.
Exactly, right. And as opposed to parameters in a Power BI semantic model in the traditional sense, where I could actually go to the backstage view where you set the refreshes and see that information, I don't see that information just openly. So it's tucked away. And like I said, too, keeping in mind, too, is I've limited the access and how much I'm pulling back here. So it is kind of tight. So I've gone ahead and created a little web API call here that's essentially going to pull back my access token for my API endpoint. So that's going to come back with my bearer token, which I'll be able to use to do all my authentication. And then with that, we're going to go ahead and grab, let's start with graph users, because I think users are an easy place to kind of start. So what I've done here is I've gone ahead and pulled back my user information. You can see I can scroll across and see some information, some email addresses, things like that. So you can see that I've got users in place. You can also see that I've tied it up to my lakehouse. So every time this runs, it's going to go ahead and push that information over to my lakehouse. So with that in mind here, we're going to simply just do a straight up replace on this, because with my users, I don't really care how frequently they change. I'm going to have users added. I'm going to have users removed, whatever it might be. I'm just going to simply replace all these people. So I've got it in the replace method, and you can see I've got it all mapped up down here. So it makes it really easy to just simply go and pull that. That is something I could do in a Power BI semantic model. I didn't really need a data flow to do this. I didn't really need to use Fabric to do this. I've done it in Power BI reports already. But since I'm using a data flow, it makes sense to just set this up. I don't need to go ahead and just recreate users all the time. So to get there, I just created a little function here as well. And let me, hold on. You gotta love the crunch here. Oh, wait, you know what? I think I found it. Nope. Nope, I'm gonna have to zoom out. Hold on.
Zoom out, that's fine.
All right, there we go. We'll get there. All right, so you can see here, I'm actually just using a function, again, to pull that information. You can see that I'm using the Microsoft Graph users endpoint here. And what I've done here is I've created a little relative path. And what I've done is I've pulled out the specific fields I want to bring in, and I just loop through, because one little trick about the user endpoint is that it only pulls 1,000 users at a time. So if I have an organization with 5,000 users, I have to iterate through this 5 times in order to get my results. So I'm going through and just pulling that through with a little bit of code. And you can see here specifically, if you look in my headers, I have my authorization header, and I'm pulling that get auth token function that I created right there in the query. So that function that I created that's using the service principal, it goes and grabs that token. I'm able to slipstream it right inside my my query and pull that data.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, I love that.
Right?
Look
It's
how
so
easy that is.
It's so easy. It's really easy with the Power Query template that I put together for this project as well. So, because all you have to do is update a couple IDs and you're all set.
So another shameless plug of your blog, but that's perfectly fine. We love shameless plugs of blogs.
Right. Well, I think it's always
You've
important.
You've got a great question.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, he had one before that.
Oh, okay.
When you were showing your Python code to stand up the lakehouse schema first, he wanted to know if that was the preferred method of doing it or just one of many flavors. And
I tried it with SQL and I did not get the results that I was looking for. So I found that the Python was the one that seemed to create it the best without any issues.
And the way that you had it set up and everything, if he goes back and freezes on that, I've seen that as a good method to set up, pre-set up tables in a lakehouse. So
right.
Before you close this one, actually, could you go back into the M code for this, where you're showing us the looping API? Because that answers another question that came in, and we're moving just a little fast for me to.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
That's all right.
The question from Christian is, where do you enter the Fabric REST APIs if you're going to be looping through Fabric to pull data in? And I presume that's right.
Yeah, actually, I'm moving too fast now. Hold on. So the first thing is, if you're going to use Fabric, because I'm going to have to jump to the other one. The biggest thing is that if you're going to use if you're going to use application-based credentials, the first thing you need to do is you need to change your scope here to point to the analytics endpoint. I have to double check it. I'll give me a couple of minutes. I could get you that answer, what that is, but that will have to change because this is right now looking to pull to the graph endpoint. So that is a big piece that we have to consider here. So we have to make a small adjustment here to make sure that that's moving to that direction. And then,
well, if you stay there for just a second, I think we could answer the question a little bit more generically, right? You'll see throughout the code that he's showing is you have this web contents. And the first parameter to that is going to be the URI to the API that you're calling, right? And then you can put a couple things together. The other code example that you had also used the relative path part of that, right? But in a general term, any API that you're using, you're going to be pretty much using that function from Power Query to help you call APIs. And then you're embedding that in that's returning a JSON document that he's embedding that within that other function. So that's going to kind of be where you do everything. And what I saw on your earlier code is a lot of times it's extremely important to be using the relative path, or you got all these weird things with authentication that you got to keep doing and everything. So,
well, it'll actually stop you. It won't let you do it if you're iterating through. And the next step, we're going to get there in a moment, where we talk about pulling for each individual date. Because we're going to have to pull everything one date at a time to get the data the way we want it. So it will actually break in. I believe Power Query should tell you, Fabric should tell you when you go to try and refresh it, says, sorry, we can't figure this out because you're trying to authenticate to multiple endpoints and we don't know what to do. Even if you set it up to say, hey, only authenticate through, the graph .microsoft.com/v1.0, it's still going to freak out because it just sees that and it doesn't know what to do. So the relative path is critical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Awesome. Thank you for circling back on that one for us down there.
yeah, no problem. So really quick, one of the things I thought was interesting, I wanted to pull back up this code here really quick because I did remember I forgot something to mention here. So when we were looking at this and going through the PySpark code here to go ahead and create our tables, one of the things I thought was interesting was the string type. When I was looking at this first time, I was like, well, string type, well, I'm like, yeah, I want a string, but I don't want, a set column width, right? I want it to be a variable character. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing that was about this. So it automatically creates a varchar data type for the column in the table and sets it for 8,000 characters. So I thought that was kind of like one of those things like, coming from SQL world, I was like, well, this feels a little weird. Why isn't this working the way I would expect it to? It does. It just has a different name. So I wanted to at least call that piece out as well.
Nice.
So
there you go, Amin. Another view of how to do that.
There we go. All right. So let me zoom back in a little bit here. So let's talk a little bit about what I had to go through to get this data out and why it's structured the way it is. So if I actually go over here to my applied steps, I might still have to zoom back out a little bit. There we go. So the first thing I did was I actually created a parameter a function inside my Power Query experience. And all I'm doing essentially is using that endpoint that I was showing early on, and I've created an endpoint that's essentially going to go and grab based off of my individual dates. So I want to be able to go and grab that. So I've got it. It's a simple parameter. It's in place. And the other thing I've done here is I've actually connected to my lakehouse. And what I like here is I've actually set this up with some parameters as well. So once again, if I go here to my graph parameter section, there we go. You can see our workspace ID and lakehouse ID are in here as well. So this kind of makes them flexible. So if I'm switching lakehouses, if I'm switching workspaces, it's really easy for you to drop in for your own use. So I've gone ahead and selected my table. I've gone in and said, hey, I want my team's user activity table specifically. And I've gone ahead and cleared out all my additional dates and filtered down to the ones that I have. So these are all the past data points I've been able to collect already to date with using the Microsoft Graph endpoint. So you can see here I went back all the way to September 13th. And you can see the last time I captured data was on the 3rd. So the idea here essentially is I want to be able to identify any holes in my data and fill them in and make sure that I'm pulling that data back. One of the things I think is kind of interesting about this, if you've ever used these endpoints, is that the data is not always available the next day. So, I would expect that here I am on the 11th, I should at least have data through the 9th, but sometimes I might not have data until the 7th. So, it's a little inconsistent. So what we want to do to make sure that we're not running afoul, we're not just running the query every day and hoping for the best and ending up with holes in our data because we had a day or two where we had nothing and then suddenly we've got 3 days worth of data. I have to go and see what I actually have in my lakehouse already. So I've gone ahead and pulled that back and figured that out.
Dominic, in your experience, when like right now, the last time you run it, there was data for the 3rd. Mm-hmm. Is it complete data for the 3rd, or do you sometimes also have to replace that last day? Like, did they do half the day through the 3rd? Is there anything like that happens?
Generally, these endpoints are pretty stable, so I've never ran into an issue where I'm missing data. But I'm sure other endpoints maybe are not as stable. So yeah, that is a good point. Is that you might have to do, depending on what your endpoint you're going to check on, you might have to consider, are there pieces missing essentially?
Yeah, nice.
And there might be a day or two missing of data as well. Like there you go. We can actually see it right here. I've got the 15th to the 18th. So for whatever reason, 16th and 17th didn't have data. Maybe I didn't use Teams those 2 days. It's very possible. But those
weekends
are
the
things that happen once in a while too. So all right. So with that in mind, I've already got that picked out, I've just removed all my duplicates so that way I don't have any noise in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and build out my logic to go pull the last couple days worth of data. So I'm going to go take today's date. I'm going to subtract 5 from it. I'm going to go ahead and list out my dates. And then once I've got my table of dates essentially put in place here, I'll just rename it. I'm going to go ahead and merge against my lakehouse. And what I'm looking for is, hey, what dates have I said I need data for that are missing potentially in the lakehouse? And actually, this will make a little bit more sense. Let me make a small adjustment because I actually have all those dates. Let's go back 8 days instead. Hope the demo gods are with me this morning. Making a lot of changes to my code.
Well, we love doing these things live. That's one of the things we're known for. Is
right. All right. So I've now gone ahead and merged that together. And now you can see that I at least have data for the 3rd, but I'm missing now data for the 4th through the 10th. So that gives me a reference point to be able to say, yep, I have at least data for one of these days. The other days are missing. So I'll just simply filter out my report refresh date column with anything that has data. And I'm just going to go ahead and execute my custom function. And this is the one that I had to use, that I had to create earlier. I actually am calling that specific function in the query. So I had to jump in and do a little bit of M code here. I could probably split this out somewhere else and do it. But I did it this way for a reason in a moment, and I'll explain why here later because, you know, I actually made this much easier for you long term as a result. So I've been able to go through. I'm able to filter out a little bit here, any missing rows. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and merge this data together and bring it into a table. And now I can expand out my records. And now, with all that in mind, I've got all my data from these different dates split out and available to me to be able to view, which is nice and easy. So the benefit here is, number one, is that I'm not going to run into a data duplication issue because I've been able to make sure that I'm only calling the data that I care about. The second reason why it's important and why it works to do it this way and pre-filter my list versus filtering afterwards is back to the conversation we were talking about towards the beginning of this whole conversation, which is the processing that's available. So not only do we have to consider the CUs that are going to be used in the Fabric environment, but I also have to consider the throttling on my Graph API. So I think we've all been there, and Microsoft's throttling is not as friendly. You just get a 429 error, and you get a bunch of blank rows that come back. So we don't want to run into those issues. So by simplifying the refresh, I'm only pulling the data that I really care about right this moment, which should speed up that experience.
Yeah, and speed up and reduce the CU usage.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love this pattern of looking at what's in your lake house, you know, where you're going to put it as your destination. I think I know where this is going, but so I'll hold off. But so you're looking at that, filtered it down on a small set, just your dates, and then getting your data and ready for your next step.
Exactly.
Good use. Good reduce. Yep.
So, and then once that's all set, now keep in mind that today's the 11th, depending on where you're at, I guess, in the world. Today is the 11th, which means that data for the 10th is probably not going to be available. It's actually probably going to be empty. It might be available. We don't know. But the idea here essentially is, though, if we can actually allow that data to continue to process through, we can then filter out all the blank rows, and then that way we don't have any blank rows in our warehouse, or sorry, in the lake house, and then we are able to pass that through. So all that is just to kind of simplify, believe it or not, that whole process. Now, it's still trying to process through. It takes a moment. You know, APIs, they're not the fastest. We all understand that, right? You know, but
what do you mean? APIs are not the way you choose to move terabytes of data?
Oh my gosh! Like,
I talk to my app friends, and they want to move all data via API. I thought APIs are Are the bee's knees the only thing we should use? What? That's not, what's going on here?
It's so funny because like when people are saying like, "Oh, I need that refresh to be so quick," I'm like, "Well, if you're using APIs, you're at the mercy of the API." I mean, I did a dashboard during COVID at the very beginning. This is how bored I was. I actually built a property assessment dashboard because they redid all the our town's assessment for the property values. So I built out a dashboard with like number of houses or number of bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, house type, neighborhood, all that kind of stuff. It was only 3,500 houses. And because I just really wanted to dig into APIs in Power BI, and that's what kind of brought me to where I'm at today for some of this. I actually learned how to use the Google Maps API to pull Street View images into the report dashboard. So you could actually hover over and see that picture of the house. They throttle at 100 calls per minute. So 3,500 houses, your refresh was going to be 35 minutes, guaranteed. Like you can't get any faster. So, but it worked really well, you know. But you can't, you know. To your point, Chris, it's not fun to move terabytes of data. It's not my favorite method, but sometimes it's what you have, right?
Right. And we were joking like about this on Twitter. Someone posted about like, do you remember when XML was supposed to be like the best way to format and share data? And I laughed because at one point in time I had to I had to send data to the federal government, and their standard was XML data types because it will save on data file sizes I could send to them, which is a total lie.
Yeah,
right?
that's not true.
That's a total lie. And there was something like 100 million records with 500 columns with schema on read, right? So like 500 columns had to have the table name and the the value for every 100 million records. I mean, the file sizes were like so insanely large. It was taking special devices just to attempt to write the XML files to send over. And that's one of a handful of times I've seen the feds actually change regulations and protocols because they sort of get swamped with these like terabyte individual files and realize, we can't open these. This is a bad idea. We should stop.
Yeah, a lot of noise in those files. So
yeah.
So
all right, how are we doing here? So
so this is still going, but here's the deal. We're actually going to switch views here in a second. But we spent all that time going through the transformation. Some of it I had to write M code to make it this slick. Some of it I was able to use, kind of a WYSIWYG experience within the Power Query editor and just use, the transformations on the toolbar. However, you might be saying to yourself, "Wow, Dom, this was really great. But now I've got to go do this 4 more times because I just did it for Teams, but now I have to do it for OneDrive. I have to do it for SharePoint. I have to do it for email and Viva Engage. So how do I make my life easier? And what happens if Microsoft creates yet a new product that we're going to want to have to go after?" Well, I'm glad you asked that question.
There's a solution for that.
There is a solution for that. So what I do is
there's more.
There's So you've got my query here. What I did was I actually changed it into a function. And what I did here, and I thought this was kind of fun, is in the advanced editor, I said, hey, I want to go find an application. And what I did was I added some code in here to point to a little table I created that's going to hold some information around these different endpoints and what's going on with them. So I can pull that information, and now I can start to call that information directly from that table and slip it into my query. For example, I'm pulling for my workspace, for my table. You can see here I'm pulling that table and pulling my Lakehouse table name that I have in that that I've already created. So it's making my life a little easier to be able to reuse this. So instead of me having to go redo all these transformations over and over and over again, I just simply created a table. And I did it here, not this way. I entered the data in here, which I'm sure some of you might freak out about. But the idea here simply was I wanted to do something simple that I could package up and give to everyone and give to the community. So this was the easiest way to make sure that that happened. So I just simply put it in this format here. And you can see I've got my app, I've got my lakehouse table, my graph endpoint, the number of columns that are coming back. That'll be important here as we do our transformations. And then also the column mappings for each of those endpoints. So that way we know what they are. And now, instead of having to go through this whole process over and over and over again, I could just simply go and say, hey, I want to use Teams. And I'm going to go ahead and invoke this query. And it'll invoke the function. And it's going to go through and do all that pulling of data for me in one shot. So that, to me, makes it real easy to redeploy. So now if I get a new endpoint that's available, such as, I don't know, Copilot has some utilization reports coming out here soon. So I can actually now go ahead and just simply add that to my table, and I can go ahead and invoke it. And I don't have to go through and re-architect this code over and over and over again. It makes it really easy to pull in. And now, of course, now that I've got it all here, I could just simply go ahead and make sure that's mapped into my lakehouse. You can see I've already got it set up. And in this situation, I do want to append this data because I want to be able to trend this over time. Mm-hmm. So I was able to actually, I should actually go back a step. Because I already created the table, I selected my existing table. I didn't create one from scratch. And now I've got everything mapped up, and I've got it set to append. So this time now, it's going to add this data into the lakehouse each day. When it finds new data, it'll put it in there. And over time, I'll have a nice cache of Microsoft 365 data as a result. So the hardest part of this whole thing in this screen was I had to map all the columns manually.
I was just going to say, right, because one of the important things is, you know, what's coming in through the API has spaces in the names where we have to put the underscores in here. So, yeah, you have to kind of do all that mapping. I was hoping you were going to point that out. But this ties all the way back to what Amin was asking, right, creating that schema. So you got your destination schema there, and you did a great job of keeping the names, you know, really close, just changing to underscores to make this step easier on yourself. You got to do some investigation first, right? So,
right, exactly. Well, the first time I did this, so what I thought was really cool when I did this was the first time I did it, I didn't create the tables ahead of time. And there was actually an option up here that said, hey, your destination column names don't work. Click here to fix it. And it changed all the spaces to underscores. So I was like, wow, that was really easy. You can't beat that. The problem was, though, and you saw it while we were sitting there waiting for that data to churn, if I'm looking for 30 days worth of data, that's going to take a long time to get in. So first off, just that first commit and just being able to get to the point that you have enough data to push into the lakehouse, that was a lot more work. The other piece is that I would be able to do that first round, but then I had to go back and rebuild my query to go call the lakehouse and filter out what I already have. So it was really messy. So at the end of the day, the win was making sure that I created the columns ahead of time. And to your point, Kevin, make it easy that I would actually remember what the column names were. So that way it was easy to map that up.
Yeah. It's always easier to code the third time.
Right. Yeah. I actually posted on LinkedIn. When I was getting ready to release part 2, I meant to release it last week, and I ended up releasing it early this week. That's because what I created, I was like, this is trash. I got to redo it. Tore it all down, rebuild it from scratch. Like, I argue you're not really in the data space if you haven't torn it all down and rebuilt it at least 3 times. That's when that's when you know you're making it.
Well, and Dominic, I think I just saw one of the best compliments I've seen in a while, and that's from Donald Parrish saying some nice M code here. That is in high praise indeed. So
yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a labor of love.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, working with APIs is really difficult. You're making this really just a little too easy on us. We can't let the general population know how easy it now is to get M code data with Power Query. That'll just cause us all sorts of problems.
Right. Well, and the beautiful thing is, and actually, if we pop back, like I said, I wanted to make this really easy for everyone. So I did export this into a Power Query template for you. So if you go to the blog, I actually have it listed in there that you could download. You can build this all from scratch. If you want to do this from scratch, like I highly encourage you to understand that, because the better you understand how I got to where I did with the code, the better you're going to really understand how the solution works. But if you download the template and import it, and actually we can probably, oh, hold on. 1 second here. If I go ahead and create a new data
Isn't that
flow,
a nice little feature they just added, that publish later?
yes, thank God. That saved me some time as well.
Hey, Dominic, a quick question. To get that new UI where it pops up on the right-hand side, did you have to do anything? Because I still don't have that in my tenant. And
Which,
create a new item and it pops up on the right side.
I didn't turn anything on, actually. It
okay.
Started doing it that way for me.
Now it does that for you?
Yeah.
A/B testing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I could go ahead and just import from my Power Query template. I've already got it created. So I just go ahead and grab it in here. And now for you, all you have to do is go and fill in 5 pieces of data. You have to fill in your app ID, client secret, and tenant ID from your service principal. And then once you've created your lakehouse and created your tables, you just need to simply pull in your lakehouse ID and workspace ID. And everything should start to marry up for you as well. So I also have the notebook that goes and creates the tables for you, so you can import the notebook and run it. So the idea here was to make it as simple as possible. I don't think people appreciate how simple APIs can be redistributed within the Power Query space, just simply by using some things like parameters to simplify that, by updating whatever the API key might be or whatever. Using a parameter goes a long way to make it so much easier for you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is fantastic. And you've got this blog, it's not just a blog. There's 3 blog posts that summarizes all this stuff, correct?
Yeah, because I think the third one's the longest, and there's a lot in there. So I tried to parcel it out a little bit at a time here. But the idea here, though, is I wanted to be able to walk through it and explain to everyone why we're doing what we're doing, how we're building everything, and make sure that we're all on the same page and understand what's happening there. So it is complex, but at the end of the day, once it's there, now I can just redistribute it. It's really easy. And that, to me, that's the goal here, is I want to be able to make it easy for everyone. Now all you have to do, kind of back to that question that was earlier, was how do I change endpoints? If I want to do this with the Power BI activity endpoint, it's the same concept. You just have to make some adjustments to what you're doing.
Yeah. So another thing to kind of point out here is back to our conversation. Should I use, a notebook? Should I use a pipeline? Should I use Dataflows Gen2? If you just want to get started with the graph APIs that Dominick's put together, start here, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of reinventing the wheel somewhere else, right? And just even to explore what's in the graph APIs and what you want to do with it within your environment and everything. I think you just made a great use case to use Dataflows Gen2 for this particular, data. So,
right. Slowly making people believers of data flows. It just takes a little bit of time, right? It's
always the right tool for the right job. So
right. Yep. And Chris, I think you posted something. Somebody had done something very similar to this, but did it with notebooks instead. I think is that correct? So yeah, you could do that, but once again, it's where do you feel comfortable? I know a citizen developer is going to feel much more right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Exactly.
Right. So. And there's straight up, I tell everyone, don't go pro code if low code works. Right. I mean, and you'll know it, right? Like if you're in like a Fortune 50 company and you've got 250,000 employees, you're going to find that these APIs are not sufficient, that are running through M and the Dataflows Gen2. It's just not going to perform today, right? You're going to have to do some really advanced, crazy stuff in Python. So you're going to have to go that pro code route. Great. If that's who you are, fantastic. Go that pro code path. But if not, for the vast majority of the people out there on the planet who do this type of analytics, you're not working at a Fortune 50 company. You're not working at Fortune 500 company, right? You're somewhere else. And a lot of times these things are way more than sufficient for the work that you're doing, right?
Yep.
Awesome.
So do we have enough time? We just got a question in about explaining the looping logic. Do we have enough time to go back and show that code? Right.
Yeah.
Of kind of knowing when you need to loop back through, right? I think there's something returned in the JSON object, right?
Right. So there's a couple different ways that looping will take place when it comes to APIs. So generally there's two ways it's done. If you have to do what they call paging, essentially with API endpoints, you'll either have to your documentation will either have a skip parameter that allows you to skip pages. So I would have to start page 1, then I would skip 1, skip 2, skip 3, etc., and move through my pages. So I would essentially need to say, hey, how many records I have divided by my my page max, figure out the page numbers and work through each one. Or in this situation, they have what's called a skip token. And that's exactly what's coming back here in the code. So you'll see here, I'm actually doing a try and otherwise to go after this. And what I do is I look for a field known as odata.nextLink. That is what Microsoft provides as the skip token. So what it's looking for here is that next link. And what it does is it essentially pulls this string that's up here. And what it does is it takes that string and it adds some context to it to show, hey, we're going to skip to the next page for us. So it automatically handles it for us. So all we're doing now is we're simply, trimming off everything that's after that question mark and passing it as a parameter and just continues to work through that. So that's how it's going to loop through in this situation. So it'll keep looking for that. If it doesn't find it anymore, not a problem. It'll just stop and bring back all the results. But that's how we're doing the looping in this situation.
Yeah. And what's also important to mention, like you said, is that's how this API implemented it. You even brought up there's a couple different patterns, right? There are patterns that a lot of APIs follow the same, methods, but I wouldn't say there's like one way, right? Or even two ways. You have to go read your API documentation and really understand that. So,
right.
That I see people getting into APIs that go, well, I don't understand. This API did this. Well, how come this one doesn't do it in the same way? They're not all the same.
They're all snowflakes. And I joke about it. For those of us who have a patina that remembers the phrase, read the fine manual, like that's what you got to do. You got to read the fine manual. But yeah, I mean, and Kevin, to some credit, like some API endpoints are much better documented than others. I will say I've worked with a lot of them now at this point. Microsoft's is well documented, but there are pieces missing that aren't always there, right? Some have right in line that you could try the API. Microsoft has the Graph Explorer that you could go to. So there's different ways for you to try these things out without having to go out somewhere else and use it. I remember I got one set of documentation. It just sent me an 11-page PDF file, and it was a mess. Yeah. It was absolutely a mess. And trying to figure out how that worked, I mean, it took days to figure out what were the endpoints, what was the data, and actually how do I model that data. So, but taking some time, reading through the documentation, like don't skip that step. It is so critical because it'll save you some frustration.
Yeah, and a lot of them are now starting to produce that common definition in Swagger, right? Which has a lot of, what we're saying. Here's how you call it. Here's what it's returning. The Swagger a lot of times even has, you could click on it to try it when you give your right authentication and everything. But sometimes it doesn't go deep. It's like in multiple places. Here's what our common paging logic is, right? It's not within every single API because they don't want to repeat it. So yeah, you have to read that fine manual.
I thought you guys might enjoy that one.
That was good. It was a great question. I'm glad we could go back into that.
Yeah, great question.
And honestly, I think it's great for us to be exploring these concepts because citizen data engineering is like something that's near and dear to my heart. It's something that we need to be encouraging people to pick up these tools because it's people in our business that know the data, that know what's going on, are the ones who are going to be like some of the most efficient and effective data engineers out there because they're going to be able to run this stuff, look at it, and just know if the data is right or if the data is wrong or if there's issues or hey, there's an opportunity for us to expand and go in this direction. And so the more we can democratize these capabilities, the better we are as if in helping us curate and build out our data estates. This is just fantastic, Dominic.
Yeah.
And uh Dominic, I apologize. I have your book someplace around here, and I know it's not within arm's reach of myself. But do you want to do a little plug of your book? I really like this one. Yeah, yeah,
Like this one? Yeah.
yeah.
So,
That's the one.
yeah. So, I guess exciting. I left it out actually earlier today, but at the beginning of the stream. But I was recently published in January of this year, and published my book, The Ultimate Power Query Cookbook for Power BI and Excel.
Oh, nice.
So, all right, there we go. So, huge. A lot went into this. A lot of what we've talked about here today is really just extending the techniques of Power Query beyond just simply pulling the data in, and really from that perspective of, yeah, I would love to transform all my data upstream at the data layer. That's my goal. But the reality is that we know that not everything is available at that data layer. I've spent a lot of time with customers that they want to be able to bring in data that they just can't get a hold of, or even just simply, I just want to optimize what I'm doing personally. So that's what this book was designed to do.
It's just fantastic. So,
Congratulations.
great job.
on
Apparently, I do have it within arm's reach. So,
that. Just had to extend your arm a little bit.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. Well, I suddenly recognized the binder. I'm like, no, I know exactly where that is. So go out and check it out. I don't have the link for me right at my fingertips.
Donald just put a link in for
did he?
us. So, yes.
Oh, good. You can always
I have
count
a
on
feeling
Donald. Well done, Donald.
He wants to have his book stacked pretty high, so I have a feeling he'll be buying it pretty soon. A whole other $1 coming to you, Dominic.
Woo!
Spend it now.
Hey, I sold more than three copies, and that's what I expected to sell. Like my mom, my brother, and a friend or two that might buy it. Like so, the fact that might have a few more copies sold, that's just exciting to me.
Yeah, you don't get rich writing technical books. That's not
Yeah.
A friend of mine said, Stephen King only makes $1 a book too.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
He just sells a whole lot more than you do.
Yeah. It's a good point.
Yeah, you don't see these as airport reads. People aren't picking them up and just cranking through it on a plane. But
You haven't been on a plane with me then.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys all so much for joining us. Dominic, thank you for all you do for the community. Really appreciate this. And you know what? We're going to give you parting words as we exit today. So what should our readers know, or what should the people that are watching this and listening, what should they know? What should they do going forward?
So I would say is if you haven't played with your APIs and getting them in, this is the time. There's a lot of easy ways. There's a lot of great free data sources out there. If you're not comfortable with it, I actually did an article on stock quotes and APIs. Same concept here. So there's a lot of great opportunities for you to try this. So whether you use Graph API or something else, get in there, give it a shot, and see how much easier it is in Fabric than in the past.
Awesome. And with that, I want you all to have the best day ever. All right? Peace.
Peace.
Digital combines strategic industry insight and advanced technical expertise to uncover and solve your digital transformation challenges. If you're interested in learning more, check out our website at bakertilly.com/digital.